Have you ever sat over a 40-foot hole in the dead of winter, completely convinced that a monster fish is just staring at your bait, refusing to bite? What if I told you that you are absolutely wrong? What if I told you that the fish you are waiting for left that spot 3 weeks ago? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going to tear down one of the most stubborn myths in the entire fishing community. We are talking about wintering grounds, those legendary deep holes where everyone thinks the fish spend the entire cold season. I promise you, by the end of this video, you will look at a frozen lake completely differently. We are going to uncover the exact biological reason why so many anglers go home with empty buckets while fishing perfectly good waypoints. Tell me down in the comments right now, have you ever fished a spot that was red hot in December only to find it completely dead in February? Let us dive into the uncomfortable truth about why you are fishing for ghosts. This topic is absolutely crucial because it is the #1 reason why seasoned anglers suddenly lose their touch late in the season. For generations, the golden rule of winter fishing has been incredibly simple. When the water gets cold and the ice forms, you find the deepest hole in the lake and you drop your bait all the way to the bottom. It is a belief passed down from grandfathers to fathers to sons. And the funny thing is, it actually works perfectly at the beginning of the season. Because of that early success, guys will set up their permanent ice shacks over these deep basins and leave them there for 3 straight months. They build a habit. They do the exact same thing year after year, completely ignoring the fact that a lake is a living, breathing environment that changes every single week. When the bites stop coming, they blame the weather, they blame the cold fronts, and they blame the bait. They never stop to think that the fish have simply packed their bags and left. Picture this highly familiar scenario. It is 6 o'clock in the morning, the air is freezing cold, and everything is completely silent on the frozen lake. You have walked a long way out to that famous deep hole, the exact same spot where the older guys always said the fish hide all winter. You drill through 2 feet of solid ice, clear out the slush, and drop your heavy lure down into 40 feet of dark water. You set up your portable heater, pour a hot cup of coffee from your thermos, and you just sit there and wait. And you wait some more. Your electronic sonar screen is completely empty, not a single mark of life to be seen. You look over at your fishing buddy and he just shrugs, telling you that the fish have a severe case of lockjaw today because of a cold front. But here is the brutal and honest truth that most stubborn anglers completely refuse to accept. Those fish do not have lockjaw, and they are not sleeping at the bottom of that deep abyss. They are simply not there anymore. You are sitting over a completely empty patch of water, literally fishing for ghosts. The old belief that fish spend the entire winter glued to the absolute deepest part of the lake is one of the biggest lies in our community. Let us talk about what actually happens under the ice as the winter drags on. The grandfatherly advice that fish stay deep all winter is incredibly flawed because it treats the lake like a static swimming pool. In late November and December, yes, the fish do retreat to the deep wintering holes. They do this because the deep water provides a stable temperature environment while the surface is freezing over and tossing the shallow water into chaos. But that deep basin is not a permanent hotel. It is a temporary shelter. As the weeks turn into months, the environment down there slowly begins to degrade. It is a silent change that you cannot see from the surface. While you are sitting up above in your insulated tent, comfortable and warm, the underwater world is shifting dramatically. The conditions that made that deep hole attractive in December are completely gone by late February. Yet thousands of guys will still walk right past perfectly good shallow water just to go sit over a dead zone. The absolute biggest factor driving this mass exodus is something we take for granted every day: oxygen. When the lake is locked under 2 feet of snow-covered ice, no new oxygen is entering the system from the wind or the waves. Down in those deep wintering holes, organic matter like dead weeds, leaves, and algae is constantly decaying on the muddy bottom. That rotting process consumes a massive amount of dissolved oxygen. By the middle to late winter, that 60-foot hole that held all the walleye and crappie in December has become a suffocating, toxic environment. The oxygen levels plummet so low that fish physically cannot survive down there anymore. So while you are vertically jigging your favorite spoon right off the bottom, waiting for a monster strike, any fish that actually stayed in that area is practically gasping for air. They are not thinking about eating your bait. They are fleeing for their lives towards shallower water where the oxygen levels are still sustainable. Now think about the food chain. Predators do not just aimlessly wander the lake, they follow the food, period. When the deep water becomes completely depleted of oxygen, the tiny baitfish and the small panfish are the very first ones to notice. They cannot handle the suffocating conditions, so they migrate out of the deep basins and move toward the transition zones and shallow flats. And guess what happens next? The big walleye, the massive northern pike, and the trophy crappies follow them right out the door. If the grocery store moves across town, you do not keep going to the empty building hoping to buy dinner. You follow the food. This is the exact same logic. You are dropping your expensive lures into a barren wasteland because the baitfish left a month ago, and the big predators followed them right up the structural breaks. You have to stop fishing the memories of early winter and start fishing the reality of the current underwater migration. There is another massive myth we need to break right now, and that is the temperature inversion myth. Many guys believe that because heat rises in the air, the deep water must be the warmest place in the lake during the winter. While the bottom holds a steady 39 degrees for a lot of the season, late winter changes everything. As the sun gets higher in the sky and the days get slightly longer, the shallow water actually starts to warm up much faster than the deep basins. Even a fraction of a degree change in a shallow, muddy bay can trigger a massive response from the ecosystem. The bugs start to wake up, the minnows move in to eat the bugs, and the big fish move in to eat the minnows. The fish can feel these microscopic temperature changes through their lateral lines. They are drawn to the warmer, shallower water like a magnet. Meanwhile, you are still parked over 40 feet of cold, dead water, wondering why your tip-up has not moved in 6 hours. Imagine you're out on the ice with your best friend. You've been staring at your fishing line since sunrise. The conversation dries up, the coffee gets cold, and the frustration starts to build. Your friend looks at you and says, "Man, they are just not hungry today. They must be completely shut down." This is the most common excuse in the history of fishing. It is a psychological defense mechanism. It is much easier to blame the fish for not being hungry than to admit that you are fishing in the wrong spot. The reality is that late winter fish are highly aggressive. They are actively feeding to build up energy for the upcoming spring spawn. They are very hungry, and they are definitely biting somewhere on that lake. They are just not biting your bait because you are fishing in an empty room. The moment you stop making excuses for the fish and start questioning your own location, your catch rate will completely skyrocket. We all fall into the psychological trap of past success. It is human nature. If you pulled a 10-pound walleye out of a specific GPS waypoint on the second week of December, your brain hardwires that spot as a guaranteed honey hole. You will return to that exact same spot in January, February, and March, expecting the same result. You will confidently tell anyone who asks that this is the best spot on the lake. But a lake is not a video game where the enemies spawn in the exact same location every time you turn it on. By relying on past success, you become lazy. You stop searching, you stop reading the environment, and you stop thinking like a predator. The guys who catch fish consistently all year long are the ones who are willing to abandon a spot that used to be great. They understand that holding on to a dead waypoint is a guaranteed ticket to a miserable day on the ice. You have to learn to let go of the past. Let us talk about the early spring push. Long before the ice actually melts, the fish know that spring is coming. Their biological clocks are ticking loudly, pushing them toward their spawning grounds. They do not wait until the ice is completely gone to make their move. Weeks before the thaw, fish will leave the deep wintering grounds and start staging on secondary points, shallow weed edges, and rocky reefs. They are positioning themselves for the big springtime feed and the subsequent spawn. If you are still targeting the deep mud basins, you are completely missing the most concentrated schools of aggressive fish in the entire lake. They have moved up the structural staircases. They might be in 15 feet of water or even in 5 feet of water right under the ice. When you finally realize that pre-spawn behavior happens while you are still wearing a heavy winter parka, you will unlock a completely new level of fishing success. If you want to find these fish that have abandoned the deep holes, you need to learn how to read the ice and the surrounding land. Stop looking at your depth map for the darkest blue color and start looking for signs of life. Pay close attention to pressure ridges, ice cracks, and places where small creeks or runoff streams flow into the lake. These areas are absolute gold mines in the late season. Why? Because cracks and inflowing water bring fresh oxygen into the suffocating lake. It is like opening a window in a stuffy room. Fish will travel miles out of a stagnant deep hole to congregate around a fresh source of highly oxygenated water. A tiny creek flowing under the ice can stack up hundreds of hungry fish in just a few feet of water. If you walk past these shallow, oxygen-rich zones just to get to a deep, dead basin, you are literally walking right over the best fishing action of the day. We also cannot ignore the sun penetration factor. As we push into the later parts of the season, the sun gets noticeably stronger. If the ice is relatively clear, or if the wind has blown the snow off certain areas, that strong sunlight penetrates straight through to the bottom. In shallow water with a dark, muddy bottom, that sunlight absorbs rapidly, creating microclimates of warmer water. This wakes up the aquatic insects buried in the mud. The sudden hatch of bugs draws in the panfish, which immediately draws in the heavy predators. You can literally have a feeding frenzy happening in 6 feet of water under clear ice, while the deep water remains a frozen, lifeless desert. You have to start thinking about how the weather above the ice affects the very bottom of the shallow zones. The guys who understand this are the ones pulling absolute monsters out of water so shallow you can barely fit a transducer in the hole. Have you ever experienced this highly embarrassing moment? You pack up your heavy sled after a miserable day of catching absolutely nothing in deep water. You are dragging your gear back to the truck, exhausted and annoyed. As you get close to the shoreline, you walk past a guy sitting on a bucket in just 3 feet of water. Just as you walk by, he sets the hook and pulls a massive, football-sized perch right through the ice. You look at him and think he is either crazy or incredibly lucky to be fishing that shallow. But he is neither. He is just smart. He understood that the deep wintering grounds were empty, and he knew that the big fish had pushed up into the shallow weeds to hunt for food. That guy on the bucket beat you because he adapted to the changing conditions while you stubbornly sat over a dead zone. It is a humbling experience, but it is the best lesson you can possibly learn out on the frozen water. When you finally make the smart decision to follow the fish out of the deep wintering grounds and into the shallow transition zones, you have to completely change your approach. You cannot use the same aggressive tactics in 8 feet of water that you used in 40 feet of water. Fish in the shallows are highly sensitive to noise and shadows. Every step you take on the ice sounds like a booming drum to a fish suspended right below your boots. You need to enter stealth mode. Downsize your tackle, use lighter fluorocarbon lines, and keep your movements quiet. Leave the loud gas auger running only when necessary, and do not kick your ice cleats heavily on the surface. You are no longer dropping bombs into a deep, dark basement. You are hunting in clear, shallow water where the fish can see and hear everything. Adjusting your gear and your attitude is mandatory if you want to capitalize on this late-season shallow bite. Let us completely destroy the myth of the lethargic, late winter fish. For some reason, the fishing industry loves to push the narrative that fish barely move in the cold and that you have to aggressively dead-stick your bait for hours just to get a single bite. This is a massive lie born from people fishing in the wrong locations. Yes, if a fish is suffocating in a deep hole with no oxygen, it will be lethargic. But once those fish migrate to the highly oxygenated, slightly warmer shallow zones, their metabolism kicks back into gear. They become fierce, aggressive hunters. They will absolutely smash a moving bait if you put it in front of them. The problem is not the attitude of the fish. The problem is your location. When you find the active schools staging on the weed edges, you will be shocked at how hard they fight and how eagerly they chase your lure. Stop treating them like they are half dead and start fishing aggressively in the right spots. This brings us to the critical topic of how you use your electronics. Too many guys treat their expensive sonar units like a television screen. They drill one hole over deep water, drop the transducer down, and just stare at a blank screen for 3 hours, hoping a fish will suddenly appear like a movie character. That is a terrible way to use your gear. Your electronics are tools for hunting, not for watching. When the fish leave the wintering grounds, you need to use your flasher to map out the transition zones. You should be drilling 10 to 15 holes in a zigzag pattern from the deep edge right up into the shallow weeds. Drop the transducer in each hole for 2 minutes. If you do not mark life, pick it up and move to the next one. Keep moving until your screen lights up. You have to aggressively search for the new holding areas instead of waiting for the fish to come back to an empty hole. If you are fishing with a group of buddies, you need to use the team approach to find where the fish have relocated. Do not just walk out to the ice, drill 4 holes in a tight circle, and sit around a single heater talking about sports. That is a fantastic way to hang out, but it is a terrible way to catch fish. You need to divide and conquer the structure. Send one guy to check the deep edge of the drop-off. Send another guy to fish the mid-depth transition zone. Have the third guy push right up into the shallowest weeds he can find. Communicate with each other. When the guy in the shallow weeds starts getting bites, everyone needs to pull up their gear and move to that depth. Working together to establish the active depth pattern is the fastest way to figure out exactly how far the fish have moved away from their wintering grounds. Teamwork is your best weapon against a changing lake. We need to have an honest conversation about the laziness factor in modern fishing. With the invention of insulated pop-up hubs, massive propane heaters, and comfortable folding chairs, it has become incredibly easy to be lazy on the ice. It is brutally hard to leave a 70-degree heated tent when the wind is howling outside and the temperature is dropping. It takes serious mental toughness to zip up your jacket, grab your auger, and go drill new holes in the freezing cold. But fishing is fundamentally a hunting sport. If the prey moves, the hunter must follow. The fish do not care how comfortable your ice shelter is. They are not going to swim back into a dead zone just because you have a nice heater running. The anglers who consistently post pictures of giant fish late in the season are the ones who are willing to be cold, tired, and mobile. Comfort is the absolute enemy of catching fish when the migration starts. Let us look at how specific species handle this movement out of the deep. Crappies, for example, will often stop holding tight to the bottom and begin suspending high up in the water column as they move toward the shallow bays. You might be fishing in 20 feet of water, but the crappies are cruising just 5 feet under the ice. If you are only watching the bottom of your sonar, you will completely miss them. Walleyes will start sliding up the steep rocky reefs during low light periods, pushing baitfish against the underside of the ice to trap them. Northern pike will entirely abandon the deep basins and begin cruising the very shallowest weed lines, looking for dying panfish and frogs waking up in the mud. Every species adapts to the degrading deep water conditions in their own way, but the common theme is always movement towards shallower, more active environments. You have to tailor your search based on the specific predator you are after. Another massive factor that goes unnoticed is the reality of early runoff. Even a slight afternoon thaw on a sunny, late winter day can create a microscopic amount of current under the ice. Meltwater trickling down the shoreline banks and entering the lake brings highly oxygenated, slightly warmer water into the shallow zones. This creates invisible underwater currents that draw fish in like a powerful magnet. While you are sitting a mile away over a barren, deep abyss, Thousands of fish are stacking up against the shorelines where this fresh water is entering the system. They will position themselves facing this tiny current, waiting for food to be washed right into their faces. If you learn to identify these runoff zones and drill your holes accordingly, you will tap into a concentration of fish that the deep water guys do not even know exists. It is all about reading the subtle changes in the environment. There is a specific moment of realization that every good angler goes through, and it changes their entire perspective forever. It is that feeling when you finally decide to abandon the deep wintering hole. You walk away from the crowd, away from the safety of the known waypoint, and you drill a fresh hole on a shallow transition break. You drop your transducer down, and instantly the screen lights up like a bright Christmas tree. There are solid red lines stacked on top of each other. You drop your jig down, and before it even hits the bottom, you feel that aggressive, heavy thump on the end of your rod. You set the hook, the rod bends double, and you realize in that exact second that you have been doing it wrong all winter. That moment of clarity is what makes fishing so incredibly addictive. It proves that knowledge, adaptation, and observation will always beat stubborn habits and old myths. To wrap up this breakdown of the old school mentality, you have to learn to respect the traditions but strictly trust the science. Your grandfather caught fish in that deep hole because he happened to be there at the right time of the year. But the fish do not care about the calendar dates, and they certainly do not care about your favorite saved GPS coordinates. And they care about three basic things. They care about survival, they care about finding enough oxygen to breathe, and they care about finding enough food to prepare for the spawn. When the deep water can no longer provide those three things, the fish leave. It is that simple. If you want to elevate your fishing game, you have to swallow your pride, reel up your lines, and follow the migration. Stop hoping the fish will return to an empty hotel and start hunting them where they actually live. So let us pull all of this together. The biggest turning point in your fishing season will happen the exact moment you realize that the deep wintering grounds are not permanent homes. When oxygen depletes and the baitfish flee to the shallows, the big predators are right behind them. Moving from deep basins to shallow, oxygen-rich transition zones is the key to turning a dead day into an absolute feeding frenzy. Understanding this underwater migration completely changes your approach from stubbornly waiting for a bite to actively hunting the fish. Thank you so much for watching and hanging out with me today. If this video made you rethink your next trip to the lake, please hit that subscribe button and leave a big like on the video. Now I want to hear from you. Head down to the comments and tell me, what is the absolute shallowest water you have ever caught a big late winter fish in? Let us get a discussion going.